Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your normal partners in crime, Greg Thompson and Aaron Quinn. Aaron, we are officially in off-season mode. How does it feel?
It feels pretty good, to be honest. I'm playing catch up. The Bill season went a little longer than I'm used to, having to talk about the team in the offseason, and I usually get a head start in December on the draft prospects because the season's looking pretty down at that point. But this year we went right up to the wire here, and so I'm trying to play catch up. I think a lot of people are way ahead of me on the draft stuff, people that pay more attention to college football and stuff. So I'm playing catch up there, but it's been fun. And we were talking a little off air. It's little relaxing having a little bit of my life back, not in Bill's season. As disappointed as I am that they didn't go further, it's kind of nice to get some of that time back. I'm a much more efficient human being when it's not Bill's season.
Yeah, it is crazy how monopolizing the breaking down film and watching the game and doing previews for the next game and looking at the next opponent and breaking down all the intricacies and arguing with people on Twitter forever. It does become very all-encompassing when you're in season. So I agree. It's been kind of nice to step back for a minute, but I guess that's the opening part of the show here is now that we've had a minute in those 2 weeks you talked about to kind of catch our breath, step back, remove ourselves maybe from the emotion of the playoff loss and kind of give some final thoughts on the season and where your head's at of what we accomplish, how we should feel about it, and just some final notes on what you saw in 2019.
For me, I think the biggest thing I took away outside of the fun of a team that was in the playoffs and secured an early playoff spot, and I think some people outside of Buffalo try to bring that down a notch because of schedule and some things like that. But that was a really fun in the season moment. But I think the biggest thing that I'm taking away is the development of the young talent on this team. Trey White took a big step forward this year. That's huge because I thought he was pretty much going to just plateau as the guy he was, which was fantastic. I was super happy with that, but he took another additional step forward here this last year. Guys like Siren Neal stepping up, and throughout the season you saw his development big time from the time we saw him in training camp throughout the season developing. Probably maybe the only guy that took a step back in that young group, that young core, was Robert Foster, who a lot of us thought was going to be wide receiver number one. That's a huge win when everybody, all those young guys are developing all throughout the year. The rookie class, something Brandon Beane talked quite a bit about. I think for the most part, a lot of those guys developed pretty ahead of schedule. From where players at those positions typically develop. I know a lot of people weren't happy with Ed Oliver's development about halfway through the year. I think he had a pretty substantial development for the position he plays for defensive tackle in year one. I think that his development alone was a win, but then you add in rookie running back and the type of production we got out of him and the development you got to see from him all year long. And then Knox, that was a guy that you and I said probably might not even play till the end of the year. And he got in and had production, was a big part of this team early on. So that's really the biggest takeaway for me was they were developing young talent while winning games and making it to the playoffs. And in my opinion, I said, it was a massive success. I said it on Twitter, and a lot of people killed me. A lot of people agreed, but half the people were there killing me. Like, massive success? No way. I think if you can take a team to the playoffs, win 10 games, and develop your young core talent at the same time, that to me is a massive success. And I think that's where they were heading this year, and that was their goal.
No, I think it's a great way to look at it. And that's really what I took away. If you told me going into the year we were going to have our most wins in 20 years, our earliest playoff lock in 26 years, that we were going to see the development that you touched on. And once again, another productive draft class where we had 4 key contributors come out of that class, that we had the vast majority of our investments from previous years step forward even further. And seeing additional progress and reasons to be optimistic, that's a huge win. And I think that we have reason to feel good about this season, about what happened, about all that was accomplished, and that, sure, there's legitimate gripes to be had and things that need to additionally be concerned about or want to see more of. But I don't think that takes away or negates what a fun season it was. I had a great time watching games this year and knowing that we had a chance every single week. I haven't felt that way in a long time, that we felt legitimately like we had a shot every single week, and we did, and we were in every single game, and that being able to put that out there and experience what we did, I think is a great feeling. And when you put that in the context of the age of the core pieces on the team, how little we're losing going into this next year, the amount of resources we have, and we're going to talk about some of the upcoming dates and some of our own players here. I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. And like you said, the players we saw take steps forward and give us reason to think there's more to come is a really exciting, peek into the future of what could be out there. And I think it's, you know, I understand fans who have been jaded and become bitter over the past 20 years, and they have reason to be. It's been a rough stretch, and that they want more success right now. And I don't fault them for that. But I think that, I also am going to be one that I'm going to choose to appreciate what we saw and enjoy the games that we saw. And I do want to see more, and my expectations will be up this year. I want to see more in 2020, but I had a good time this year and I enjoyed it. And that was my biggest takeaway, was taking more joy from what we saw and not letting the ending spoil that for me.
Yeah, and there is part of me that is that jaded guy that you talked about and that has the jaded fan in him. And I do have concerns. Is this defense going to be able to be a top 5 defense 3-4 years in a row? Are they going to be able to maintain that level of play that we've seen since Sean McDermott came here? That's a really difficult thing to do. I was surprised they've been able to do it as consistently as they have so far. Are they going to be able to maintain the health? We saw, obviously, something we could talk about in a little bit. We saw a number of surgeries in the offseason, guys playing through injury, but the health of the team throughout the year, as far as guys missing games, missing time, missing practice, it was probably record setting. I think if we look back throughout the years for at least the Bills team, we haven't seen anything like that in a long time. Are they going to be able to keep that type of core health? Big name players not going down. And then the schedule is going to get tougher because they did better. That's just a natural thing that's going to happen. Are they going to be able to overcome a tougher schedule? So a lot of things lining up to where if you are a jaded person or you have that little devil sitting on one shoulder saying like, yes, there's all this development and all this excitement and they should be better next year, but there's a little bit of this reality that they're probably not going to be able to sustain the health they have. They're not going to be able to sustain a tougher schedule. Can they sustain that type of defense? So you definitely still have questions. It's a far from perfect team. There's a lot of work for Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott to do here. They've gained all those assets. A lot of work to do. It's not as big as drafting your quarterback, but this is a big offseason for these guys, both in free agency and the draft, of can they get the right pieces on this team to take that next step and overcome some of those problems. If you get the right pieces in free agency and in the draft, you can overcome an injury or two. You can overcome and increase the strength of schedule. So I have some fears, some hesitancy going into this next season, but I'm excited through this offseason process to see what they can add, because the pieces are out there. There's going to be opportunities for them to add legitimate pieces for the Bills to take that step. And now's the time to see if Brandon Beane is the GM that we think he is and can be in the running for an executive of the year type of guy.
I agree. And I look forward at the schedule next year. And I think, there's reason to be concerned about the travel that's out there. I'm hesitant to look ahead and decide who's good and who's not. Things change so much.
Right.
I'm pretty sure we're going to be 16-0, but I'm not sure. We'll wait till it all nets out.
That'll be our first schedule predictions, but then we might temper it from there.
Yeah, I'm starting out that I'm pretty sure we're undefeated, but we'll go from there. We'll figure it out as we get closer. And there's a couple things you said that triggered some thoughts for me as we've been kind of going through everything here. The crazy overreaction to these end of season surgeries that players have been kind of comical. People thinking that there's some, just
grand
enormous issue. Yeah, that they've been having. Now, I will say, if you want to apply anything to this, it's that when you're looking at the new facility that's there, and we've always wondered, like, obviously there was some good luck and really good fortune in not having those ACLs and crazy injuries beyond Harrison Phillips. That, obviously having a new facility and the most modern conditions and all the treatment tools that they have doesn't mean that we're not going to have injuries. But I can't lie, when I saw Ed Oliver and Cody Ford and John Feliciano and all these surgeries and everything happening, I think it's naive to think that having all of the most modern and, best available resources from a treatment standpoint might not mean that maybe we can manage some of those injuries better than we could in the past.
Yeah.
Maybe things that would have derailed someone's season, maybe we now have the tools and resources to fight through a few more of them that, it's not going to miraculously reattach someone's labrum. It's not going to magically stop a pec from tearing or an ACL from tearing, but maybe something in the past would have cost us games or had a guy's season end. Maybe now we're able to be intelligent about the usage, the treatment, the repetition and pattern of how to best band-aid that along. Maybe we can net some of those things out there, and that those three situations specifically, John Feliciano playing through the shoulder, the rotator cuff that he had, and that Cody Ford looked like a shoulder. Ed Oliver had the kind of hernia, whatever they call it, the term they call that now for the mid section surgery. Maybe those are things in the past that would have cost us games or ended seasons early. So I at least am going to, wildly speculate that I think you can apply some of that to the new age treatments and the modern advancements we've made in that area, and that maybe that was some connection to that investment.
Well, I think if you piece together all the different articles and conversations and interviews about just how, one, even before the new facility was in place, how Sean McDermott was using kind of analytics with the training staff and trying to, throughout the summer, make sure people weren't doing stuff, playing on the grass at St. John Fisher, keeping it on the grass because they had data that suggested that you're going to have less injuries, stuff like that. You could put like all these little pieces together and kind of see a forward thinking trend in the organization from top to bottom. And I think that you hit it on the head that can help with the maintenance side of things, but I do think it helps with the prevention side of things too. And yeah, you can't prevent ACLs from tearing, but there are things that they can do to limit some of the risk of some of these injuries with the data that they have and how they work players during the week into the week. So I think they have a full scope of what they want to do with the players when they're in their care. And it starts with prevention. And then when prevention is no longer an option because a player gets hurt, then it's how do we maintain this injury? And, I think in the past, there was always old school doctor way of thinking. It's like, all right, you got this shoulder injury. You can either have surgery or miss time and wait. The forward thinking way is, all right, we have the surgery. Let's gather all the data on this. What can we do? And what are the treatments that we can continue you playing without, are we going to be able to get you at a 75%, 80% and continue to play throughout the season? So it's nice to see that type of forward thinking. I don't know, again, if they'll be able to maintain that. I think some of the injuries that you talked about, they just kind of breezed by with some luck of no torn ACL, besides Harrison Phillips, no torn ACLs, no pecs torn off the bone or anything crazy that happens throughout a year, and some of those freak injuries that you can't avoid. But it's really cool to see a forward thinking thing because it just hasn't been that way in Buffalo for years here. Like you said, just guys, seasons always seem to end, and hopefully they can continue it. But I think a benefit when it comes to free agency, we heard it kind of this year. Some of these guys that maybe have had injuries in the past come in and see the facility and talk about some of that preventative care and some of the maintenance throughout the season and talk to the players about how they're treated. I think that's going to be a huge draw for maybe some veteran type guys that are looking to extend their careers. But yeah, back to the injuries, man. I don't think there's any grand conspiracy. This isn't the first time we haven't, our friend Rob Quinn, who used to be on the show, broke that Zay Jones injury. I forget exactly what he tore, something in his shoulder or arm, and he played through it for the whole year, and he had a surgery after the season, but he never showed up on the injury report. So this isn't the first time it happened. It's a little weird that they all kind of came out and we didn't hear a thing about it, but that's the Bills organization. We don't hear anything about anything until it has happened. Trades, Chip saying it was a labrum for Zay. But trades, free agency, all this stuff, it happens, and then we know about it. There's no pre-news that something fishy is going on anywhere. So I think they'll get tagged for that Jerry Hughes one just because it was a little wonky and that came out. So there might be something to it, but I think that's just the NFL is going to have to slap them with a little fine just because that's what the NFL has to do. But I don't think there's anything malicious or any kind of tinkering with the injury reports or anything like that. Maybe I'm just a blind homer bias fan, but I think it's just typical offseason exit interviews, and this came up and we got to get work done on it.
Well, and I think it's all in the semantics of what is the injury report. The injury report is designating players who are at risk of missing the game.
Hmm.
If between the training department and the player, they've determined that there is no risk of him missing the game, in theory, there's no reason to list him. So
Right.
I know obviously the NFL is going to differ somewhat with that, but that's going to be the basis of the argument is that, hey, every single player in the NFL could list dings and things that are there that they fought through all year. But if there was no real risk of them missing the game, it's not accurate to list it. So we'll see where that goes. I agree. They're probably going to get a fine or a slap on the wrist for the Jerry Hughes thing. And I also think I think fans are just learning about this, about how many players fight through things during the year and then have surgery because they have the entire 4 or 5, 6 month window to let things heal. And that rather than just doing treatment, they're going to have the best surgeons in the world perform surgery to have it properly fixed. And that this has been happening forever. And that because of the social media, Instagram post op photo world that we're in, it's just now blatantly broadcast into our eyeballs that, oh, this is happening. This isn't new. This has been happening forever. We just didn't find out before.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and some of these things are like the core muscle surgery. That's something that Cole Beasley had in between
And
OTAs.
Mitch Morse.
And yeah, totally just a kind of a cleanup thing for guys like that have multiple surgeries throughout their life. That's nothing. That's just going in for a
Yeah.
quick procedure and then coming back out and you're training again in a month.
Well,
So
those guys did that in April. This is happening
yeah,
in January.
yeah. So this is just it's postseason maintenance. It's great that they're addressing all of it and getting it out of the way early. Sometimes you hear some of these things that linger into the OTAs and stuff like that, and a guy didn't get the surgery in time. It seems like they're getting everybody out of the way, let them do it, rest up, take your vacation, come back, because this all turns around real quick. Off
Oh,
season's long for us because we're filling time, we're filling weeks of content. But for them, for players, for the staff and stuff, this all turned these next 3-4 months turned quick, and then they're back at it in no time. So it's good to get these out of the way, whatever type of physical therapy they need to get through it. But kudos to all of them. They got everyone that had an injury played fantastic. So if they're playing that way at whatever less than 100% that they were, I can't wait to see them playing back at 100% when you got a guy like John Feliciano. And I know Cody Ford had his problems, but he still played at a high level at
oh yeah.
college. And Ed Oliver finished the season getting stronger. So I don't know when he had this core muscle injury, but if he's finishing stronger with an injury that requires some surgery, I can't wait to see him back healthy at the
Yeah.
start of next year. So those are all kind of hidden under that as a benefit that once those guys get back healthy, we should expect them to all be better.
Yeah, and moving into the next segment here, it's something we've been talking about. You mentioned how the players ramp right back up, and we've talked for a year and a half now that 2020 is the season. 2020 is the year that we've been building towards. And you're talking about the last season in the rookie deal for their first draft class with, Trey White, Matt Milano, Dion Dawkins. You're still in that rookie window for Josh Allen and Tremaine Edmonds and pieces there. We stacked another strong draft class last year. We have the majority of our core signed. We'll have a couple players coming up on their deals, that we'll talk about in a minute here. But that brings us into 2020. And to understand how that's going to line up, let's start with those first core dates that are happening in 2020 and some of the key things that are coming up. The first one is actually today, January 17th. A lot of people on Twitter saw a fair amount of decisions coming out from college players. Today's the last deadline to declare for the NFL draft for underclassmen. So there were a couple of surprises, seeing a handful of running backs that people liked. You and I had been talking about names like Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Chuba Howard. Those guys all coming back. I think I'll probably get yelled at. I think it's Chuba Howard, but however the heck you say it. All deciding to return back to college. A lot of other names coming out there. And then that leads into next week where we'll have a squadron of cover one guys heading down to the Senior Bowl. So we'll be out there checking out some stuff there. And then you start to get into some of the technical dates that are out there. So there's a window that we saw Duke Williams last year where we're able to sign guys out of the CFL up until between January 31st and February 11th. There's a little window that they open up there to be able to work through things. And then we get into the scouting combine. You have that the end of February 24th to the 2nd. You have the underwear Olympics out there looking at the guys that are coming out there. A couple dates that I don't think are going to matter for the Bills as much, but for other NFL teams and for some maybe free agent targets we're looking at, hoping that they don't get this. On February 25th, right after the combine, is the opening of the date for franchise or transition tags to be out there. So some targets and names that we hear other people talking about that the Bills may go after: Yannick Ngakoue, Matt Judon, Brandon Scherf, AJ Green, any of the top name free agent talent that's potentially going to be out there. That's going to be a big day to monitor. I don't think that any of our names are going to be in play for a franchise or transition tag, but we have there from February 25th up to March 10th. And then the last one I'll talk about here is we're getting into this phase of the offseason is really the start of the league year. So on March 16th, you start the legal tampering process where you can go and negotiate with free agents and agents to be able to kind of get some of those deals going. And I actually misspoke there. You can only talk to agents. You can't actually talk to the players. And then officially on March 18th, the league year starts. And that's the day where you see all the reports coming through that we've known about for a couple days and where that starts to come together. So as you said, Aaron, it really comes along quickly between the items preparing for the Senior Bowl and the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl and the East West Shrine Bowl and all those different pieces and the leading up to the combine and then free agency. It all comes pretty quick.
Yeah, it's a super fast turnaround, and it's fast for the Bills. I mean, everybody's around the clock. I think that's one of the biggest misleading ideas is things like the bye week and the off season, that there's some sort of large big gap where there's nothing going on in the Bills organization. That could be further from the truth. The coaches are all back at it. They're evaluating everything that they did this year. They're starting the scouting process along with the scouts and getting them, what do we need to be, when we're at the Shrine game, we're at the Senior Bowl, what are the pieces that we need the most? They're setting their boards, they're doing all that now. Plus they're strategizing for the guys that they have for next year. What do they got to do to get these guys in place next year? The players, they get a little bit more of a break here coming up, but this isn't like the 1990s where it was off season and you just went out and you went on vacation and then you showed up and training camp was where you got in shape. If you follow these guys on Instagram, they're right back at it. Like the guys that are going to have their surgeries are doing it, but these other guys are going to, take a couple weeks here and maybe go on vacation, but they're going to be ramping right back up because you don't get out of shape in the NFL anymore. This is something that is maintained. It's a year-long season for these guys. So it all turns around really quick. Those dates start to come quick. I think this year for Bills fans, it'll actually go quicker because we had a winning season. So we're excited getting into next year. There's a lot of confidence in the fan base. It was a lot longer the year you knew they were going to pick a quarterback. That off season felt like forever because all the quarterback talk, you know what I mean? It was just all over the place. It just dragged out. The pro days dragged out. I think this year where there's, I think a lot of fans, if you did a poll, probably 80% would say take a wide receiver round one. But I don't really know what direction this team's going to go. I really think they'll go pretty much BPA, best player available on some kind of spectrum of need. But I don't think they're going to reach for, I would like to see defensive end or wide receiver get addressed. But if that's not the best player available and there's some other position need kind of floating in there, really think they have that flexibility. So I'm intrigued of the openness and flexibility that they have both in free agency and in the draft. There's some pieces I think you and I agree on that, what those top 5 pieces that should be looking for are. But I think that openness is going to make this offseason go by a little bit further or a little bit quicker. It's a little bit more leisurely for being a fan, and it's going to blow by for us and get right into the draft season. I can't wait for that. Really, spring NFL is some of my favorite because you get all the new toys, get all the new stuff, and that's fun. It's like Christmas, and you get to open up the new stuff and play with it and think about, oh my God, what's T. Higgins going to look like with Josh Allen now that we've got him? And then you start to kind of play all those scenarios out in your mind, and that's a fun time to get on the show with you and go. Some of these other dates, they're not super fun shows, you know what I mean? Like, so we still have to do them, but as you get into the spring and it really ramps up, that's going to be a lot of fun this year for us.
Oh yeah, and like you say, I mean, we heck, you're our DM between Eric and you and myself today, talking about there's probably some positions fans should brace themselves for that
Yeah.
might be a bit more realistic than they realize. I think everyone assumes it's either wide receiver or defensive end, and they even get really passionate that it has to be one or the other. And there's a chance the first round pick could be an offensive tackle or a cornerback or a defensive tackle, and it could
Yeah.
make sense in that, I'd like to think those are in there, and heck, maybe even a running back. I'd get a little
Yeah, let's
frustrated,
do
but
it.
you'd get a lot more excited than I would. But somewhere in that order, there's a
Sure.
lot of positions that could make sense, whether they're first round or fourth round. And heck, we're not even going to know that until we get through free agency. Because you look at last year, we had such a crazy list of needs, and that we were certain the first round pick had to be an offensive lineman because we needed 4 new offensive linemen. Well, Brandon Bean went out and signed 7 of them. And all of a sudden, it was like, oh, yeah, I guess we can afford to draft Ed Oliver. I guess this would be nice. So we'll give it some time. And on that topic, we're not going to get into our free agent preview from a
Wish
available
list.
unrestricted free agent target, but some information came out today that we thought was kind of interesting. And some of our friends over at Spot Track, you guys heard me interview Mike Giannitti, who runs Spot Track, actually from Western New York. He's a big Bills fan, but has a nice objective view as he's doing his market value analysis of upcoming players. And there's 2 free agents coming up that are going to have their contracts up in March, and 3 more that are potential extensions that I think they put out some numbers that I'll say kind of surprised me in the numbers that came out here. So just some upcoming free agents that the Bills need to pay attention to that we're potentially going to lose or are going to be free agents here in a couple months here. Obviously, the 2 biggest names are Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson. We'll get to those numbers in a minute, but just to reference a couple other names that fans talk about, Kevin Johnson, Quentin Spain, Ladrin Waddle, then even some guys like Julian Stanford, Corey Luget, players like that are out there as well. If you hear people throw around names like Isaiah McKenzie, Levi Wallace, Robert Foster, they're exclusive rights free agents, and Isaiah McKenzie restricted, which means that we control their contract for next year. But a lot of those guys, I think, are going to be in discussion. I think we bring later in Waddle back. I would guess a guy like Julian Stanford and Corey Luget sign back, but aren't guaranteed roster spots. Quentin Spain and Kevin Johnson are both going to be certainly in just what the market bears. I think both of them have earned a little bit of a raise from what they made last year. Johnson was at $3 million, Spain at $2 million. I think they're both somewhere in the $4 to $6.5 million range, and I wouldn't be upset with anything in there. But the 2 that Mike and the team over at Spot Track put out were for Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson. And the 2 numbers he had, he projected Shaq Lawson at 7.6 million and Jordan Phillips at 6.1 million. And I know, I think I speak for both of us, that was a bit lower than I expected.
Well, yes and no. I think Jordan Phillips is probably worth about that. I think that that's like a good objective view if you were looking at him at his whole career, who he is as a player. I think he's going to get more than that, whether it's with the Bills or on the open market. I think somebody's going to overpay for the sack production this year and think that they can trap that in a bottle and continue to have him play at that production. I really like Jordan Phillips. I think he's a fun guy to have on this team. I think he's bought in. I don't think he'll ever see the type of production that he had this year as far as just raw numbers. I just don't think he'll ever live up to that production. So I don't think it's an unfair number for him. I don't think it's what he's seeking. I don't think it what his agent wants. And I think a team will probably come higher than that number. And I bet the Bills number is probably somewhere around there. It might be what Shaq's number is, that 6-7 million. I think Shaq's is low also. And I think Shaq does bring more value by a substantial margin to this team specifically. I don't know what his value is out there to other teams. He really hasn't been a big impact player outside of this year. And there's a lot of questions of, was it all for the money? Is it because it was a contract year? I don't know that that's true. I think that he could be a good player outside of that. But if it comes close to that number, I mean, it's a no brainer for me. If you can get him for around 8, because I was around the 10, 11 range in my mind. That's where I thought he would be. So if that's an actual value, I don't know how, if there's any data that tracks the spot track, how close they've been in the past or on their market values versus what guys actually got on the open market, or what the curve on that is. But if you can get them even in a couple $1 million range of that, I feel like that would be a pretty substantial win for the Bills, and pretty easy, because I don't know that people are realize how thin the defensive line depth becomes here pretty quick here in the next year and a half if we don't bring back some guys, or you start to bring in some unknown pieces. That it starts to get shaky, and I know that they don't want to do that.
Yeah, the 2 deals that he put out there, he had Shaq Lawson at 4 years, 30.8 million, breaking down to 7.6, and then Jordan Phillips at 3 years, 18.6 million, breaking down to 6.1 per. And I think that, if either of those are even close, like you said, even if we're talking 10% within that range, and that it's actually 3 years, 20 or 21 million for Jordan Phillips, I'd probably be okay with that.
Sure.
I'd feel a lot better about that rotational depth and keeping Ed Oliver fresh and being able to use them as a pass rushing tandem inside. And then Shaq Lawson, if that eked up to 32 or even 36 million over 4 years and it was just below 8 or 9 million, I'd probably be pretty happy with that as well. And if we got even close to either of these two numbers, I think that would be a win relatively to what I expected and would make me a lot happier about re-signing both of them.
Yeah, and then it's something for me. It's about what can we in-house check off our list before we go looking for new pieces. And if you can do it and it feels comfortable, even if it feels up a little bit tight, you start getting into that range where maybe I'm getting a little uncomfortable about a deal like this. I think that the continuity and the consistency, and Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott both made it a priority. They talked before their or their postseason here press conferences, and they both made it a priority to say how much they wanted to bring every piece of this team back if they could, and any guys that wanted to come back, they want to bring them back if they could. So I think if they can find that happy range there, it's a no-brainer for them. And I think maybe you're willing to overpay your own guys by that 10-15% than you are to pay some new piece. And Brandon Beane's talked about it before, when guys in the locker room see who you pay and who you
Yes.
give money to, and that is important to them. And I think what I took from that was your own guys, the guys that are in the building, the guys that work hard, the ones that bring the juice every single day. When you pay those guys, the guys in the locker room pay attention. If you give them maybe 15% more than they're worth, the other guys in the locker room see that, and that kind of becomes an infectious thing. And it is, at the end of the day, it's all about money. So if you pay your own guys and you show that's the established pattern for this organization, I think you start to get more out of all the team, out of all the guys. And the best teams do it. You look at teams like the Packers, the Steelers. You look at some of these teams that have consistently been good. They pay their own guys. They don't overpay. If guys want to get overpaid, they let those guys walk. But if it's going to be a fair deal and we can keep you, that's what we're going to do. And I think the Bills need to be able to do that. I think if one of these guys can come back on a deal like that, that would be a huge win, and be able to check something off the list before we even get into the new toys and things like that. I'd like to at least check one of those lists on the defensive line, bringing a guy back, so that the lift isn't harder here this offseason.
I agree completely. And I think that that's going to put us into a good spot to be able to talk about extending some of that upcoming draft class that's coming due after 2020. And the 3 core pillars of that are obviously our shining star of Trey White, our stud, linebacking duo along with Tremaine Edmonds of Matt Milano, and what I think is really a blossoming left tackle of Dion Dawkins. And the 3 extension numbers that SpotTrack put out will start at the top with Trey White at 15.6 million, which in fairness would be the highest cornerback contract in the league right now. That's higher than any other cornerback. The highest ones out there are, Patrick Peterson at 14, Tremaine Johnson at 14.5, Josh Norman at 15, and Xavier Howard at 15.05. So 15.6 is a step forward, but that's also coming at the same time with Marcus Lattimore and, Humphrey in Baltimore and some other young stud guys coming up here that I think if we got he's projecting 5 years and 78 million for Trey, not including the target of where that falls in with the 5th-year option. If we got Trey White at 15.6 million, I think that's a coup. When I talked to Mike on the show, he thought we'd probably end up closer to 16 and a half, maybe even upwards of 18 million. So I get the analysis of where he's at here, but I think similar to what we saw with Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson, what the market bears and what someone's willing to pay isn't always in line with what the math shows it might net out to. So I think this is another one where 15.6 million, sign me up.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not a cap guy, and I'll do the shows and talk about it, but you know me, I don't have a lot of cap takes. But the number that I've had in my head with Trey was 17.
Yeah.
I figured, what's the highest paid guy? Pop a couple on top of that, because that is what he's worth to me. That's what he's worth to this team. I don't know that he's the number one cornerback in the league. I think he made a good case for it this season. I don't know if he can do it every year. I want to pay him like he is, and it won't last long. Somebody's going to come right behind him and break that record. So let him have it for a year, make him the highest paid. Don't even have a question. I don't even want Lattimore in the range. Make Trey White, make him feel good, make him want to stay in Buffalo for the rest of his life. I think he's your first pick. He's the guy you brought in. He's done everything the right way. He's a huge ambassador for your city, for your team. All of that stuff matters. I think he's going to be a phenomenal leader and take a part of that leadership council with this next contract too. I think that they're going to thrust him into that. He wore the number one jersey at LSU, and you wear that for a reason. These guys are natural leaders. So I think he's one of the easiest investments, in my opinion, to overinvest in. So yeah, if you can get him for less than an overinvestment, absolutely do it. No brainer, sign me up. If you could do it, if you have to overpay for him, still it's a no brainer for me. Sign me up. He's the kind of guy that sets the tone for your franchise outside of the cornerback position. That's hard to find, and he does that. And it's such an important role that he plays, both on and off the field for this team. I think everybody in the organization feels pretty comfortable with that one.
Yeah, and we've said it this whole time. There is value in sending the message that if you get drafted to Buffalo and you come to Buffalo and you buy in and you ball out to the level of an all-pro level, you can become the highest paid player at your position in Buffalo.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important message to reinforce, that you don't need to worry about coming here. Things can go well coming to Buffalo and pay off for you playing well here. And I'd love for that to be reinforced with Trey White.
And that's better than what we've traditionally had, which is you can be really high pay here, but it's because we're going to overpay you as a free agent to beg you to come here. Now you're talking about, we draft so well, and if you pan out and you help us produce a winner, then we'll pay you. And I think that's the right way to approach overpaying. I know people in Buffalo have been frustrated for years of overpaying for talent. I'd much rather overpay for my own, because I've developed here. I've put the time into them here, and now I can pay them for all that now and keep them locked up. I think that's the right way to do it. And we'll see what Trey White is going to be the first to, kind of come up against that option for this team.
Well, and I think another one I want to give credit to one of our podcast compadres, Matt Fairburn, made a good point about the message that could come along with Shaq Lawson. And that, I think Trey White's on the cleaner side of it, that you're sending the message that if you come and play well and buy in, you can get rewarded. Shaq Lawson's one of the few guys that they've publicly called out and that they've actually been critical of in the media, and that's not a common thing. And that there's also some value to reinforcing that, hey, if we say you need to step up and produce, and then you do, and you continue to buy in and you continue to play well when we've challenged you and you respond to that challenge, that can pay off as well. Sure. And that reinforces the fact that it makes it okay to challenge guys, to say that, hey, just because we call you out and challenge you doesn't mean you're in our doghouse forever. If you respond to that in the right way, that can pay off for you too. And I thought that was an interesting point I hadn't really thought about. That, not that that's a factor that's going to decide whether you pay him or not, but I do think that's a positive that can come along with it, besides just the reinforcement of Trey's contract.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, and definitely something that they're talking about when they're talking about Shaq Lawson. And those things, Brandon Beane doesn't say things that aren't important to him, and he said it a number of times that that's an important thing to him. And I agree. And Shaq's been the guy that I've been pounding the table to bring back. So whatever excuses or peripheral stuff that we got to build up as to why that's a good reason, I'm all for it.
So the last two numbers here were both ones that surprised me a little bit in the what they put out there, and we'll start with Dion Dawkins. They put a projection of 14.3 million for Dawkins, and that's not crazy. I mean, that's just it's really just kind of the sticker shock that people need to brace that that's what offensive tackles get paid. And that I think now you saw, even some splurges with Andrew Norwell at guard. Jacksonville paid him upwards of 15 million, and Brandon Scherf's going to beat that number this coming year. So there are guys who are getting paid more than that. And when you get into a left tackle, that I know some people don't know. Our man Thorne that goes through with the O-line play had an awesome, kind of thread earlier talking about how much fun it is to watch the physicality of Dion Dawkins and how powerful he is. He had an awesome stretch of clips showing how he used counter moves, tricking pass rushers, and he had this nasty kind of snatch move where he would just drop guys onto their face. And it was a really fun clip to watch. And I think that Dion Dawkins took a little bit bigger of a step forward than people realize. And I think a lot of folks weren't sure how much of 2018 was losing Richie Incognito by surprise and having to supplement a guy as poor as Vlad Dukas and the other rotation of slappies that were playing next to him. But getting to that point, how much was, hey, I don't know, maybe Dion's not the guy. We might need to move him to guard. He had a pretty darn good season this year and was a really, really solid, reliable left tackle. And that, he's probably not Tyron Smith, and he probably never is going to be, but he's pretty darn good. And that the 14.3 was a little bit of sticker shock for me. But if that turns into a situation where you're telling me we need to sign up for, 5 years and 70 million or 4 years and 56 million, and that locks up our left tackle for 4 or 5 more years, I'm ready to do that because that's simply what they cost, and that I don't want to go into kind of creating that problem if we don't have to.
I'm conflicted on this one, man, because I don't like the idea of making him a top 5 paid left tackle. I agree with all the things you said. I think he had a huge improvement. I think he killed all the conversation of moving him inside, at least outside of the loud minority that will probably still have that view. I don't see him there. I'd like to get him in the top half of the league at tackle, but I don't think I'm ready to make him a top 5 paid left tackle. I don't think that he's secured that type of money, but if there's a position in the league that is going to way overpay a guy, it's going to be at left tackle. The importance is on there, even though I don't necessarily think that left tackle is as important as it was 10 years ago because defenses are moving guys all around. I think that kind of stigma of the left tackle being that much more important than any other position on the line isn't super true anymore because there's the defenders are changing and those guys can line up all over the field and they'll attack you from wherever your weakness is. So if you have a great left tackle, they're not going to attack you straight on there. I think he gets up close to that. I think that's a close number, and I don't know how well that sits with me, man. That's one of those ones where if he never really plays up to that contract, that's the kind of contract that can start to hurt you long term because you start talking about some of these numbers, these Trey Whites, and we're going to get to Milano and some of these extensions. And Jordan Poyer wants some money. He's made that clear out there on the internet. His girlfriend's made that clear. So you're going to start to come up to losing some good players. And it's going to be these kind of contracts that are going to be the difference between keeping a guy and making sure that you have this left tackle for the next 5 years. So this one I'm conflicted on. I'm going to need more time to kind of digest that. I'll roll with whatever Brandon Beane puts the value on, but man, it's a tough pill to swallow. I like Dion Dawkins. He's again another guy that's great on and off the field, an ambassador. He's done everything. He had a down year, came back strong. So all the reasons make sense to get an extension done, but putting him up there with the top guys in the league scares me.
Well, and just showing some of the statistical comparison, anybody who hasn't had a chance to play around at spottrack.com, they do an awesome job with this stuff. They showed the top 4 paid offensive tackles, and Dion Dawkins played a higher snap count percentage, allowed fewer hurries per game, and fewer sacks per game than all 4 of the top paid tackles in the league. So that speaks to why you saw this. He was on par for those numbers with David Bakhtiari and Donovan Smith and Tyron Smith and the guys that are being compared here. That it's interesting where those came from now that you see it. So I agree that was a bigger number than I was prepared for when it came out. But honestly, we need to brace ourselves for that's what left tackles cost, and that our choice is to start over again and hope that we can get lucky with a young rookie or some other replacement in the free agent market that we'd probably have to pay just about as much, or pay Dion Dawkins probably a bigger number than we're ready for. So
I think it's going to be I mean, the guy's a team captain.
yeah,
That matters to this locker room. He's a young team captain. So I think he's got the leverage in this scenario, him and his agent, but all the things you talk about. The agent calls him up. All right, are you guys going to start over? You going to draft another guy? You're going to really do that to Josh Allen? Brandon Beane has talked about it. Maybe his biggest mistake as a GM is not having that line in place for Josh Allen's rookie season. Even though they didn't think Josh Allen would play, he's talked about that's probably the biggest mistake he's made, not having that line. He's not going to go and damage the line for if we're talking about the difference between $3 and $4 million a year. He's just not gonna take that risk. I don't think so. I think Dion Dawkins has all the leverage to get that deal.
I agree. So I'm going to do this one in reverse for fans, and I'll kind of line up some of the stuff for you. The next player is Matt Milano. The analysis they did was taking a look at upcoming players who are also coming into free agency at the age of 24, 25, 26, in that ballpark. They compared it to the number of tackles per game, sacks per game, run stops or tackles for a loss, coverage catch percentage, so the catch percentage of guys that they're covering, the number of hurries, and the opposing quarterback rating when in coverage. So I think that's a fair spectrum of the kind of plays that Matt Milano makes. And then they showed the plays and why it falls within to that range within a 1% plus or minus on these players. And the four comparable players contract wise that match each of those stats in the games played, and then like I said, tackles, sacks, stops, tackles for loss, coverage, catch percentage and coverage, hurries, and quarterback rating were Jalen Smith, Anthony Barr, Shaq Thompson, and Quan Alexander, which led to a market average of $13 million, or a 4-year, $52 million deal. I had been projecting 10 to 11 million, so it's not like it's crazy, but that was the biggest number from a surprise standpoint for me.
Yeah, I'm surprised by it, and I like Matt Milano a lot. I think I can't tell if there's more in him or if he's at his ceiling. I know that he basically got back to where he was at times from before his injury. He
Yeah,
just
really,
hasn't.
really nasty injury.
Yeah, a very nasty injury, and he got back there at times. He's just had an issue maintaining that consistency. But when he's on and playing great, this defense plays at a different level. They really do. Like, they're good when Matt Milano's still, making his mistakes or lacking consistency. It's still a good defense. When he's on and having a great game, this defense plays just at a different level. So he does bring a real impact. I don't know that he's better than those four guys. I think maybe they're saying he's on par, but what they're saying is he's going to get paid in that, to be in that better than those guys. They're going to make him the seventh highest paid linebacker in the game. And I just don't know if he's that guy. I mean, and here's my problem, man, is we said, okay, it's fine. Go ahead and pay Trey a couple $1 million more a year. Okay, fine. Pay Dion a couple $1 million more a year. And then you do it again with Milano. Now you're talking about $6-7 million more a year than what you kind of felt comfortable for three guys. You said you can't do that. And then I think if we had this conversation, I don't know what they're projecting Jordan Poyer's eventually to be. We have that conversation with Jordan Poyer. I think we all feel comfortable paying him an extra $2 or $3 million a year. They're not going to be able to do this. And some of these guys are going to be sacrificed. And I don't know if you had to tell me to pick two of Trey White, Dion Dawkins, and Matt Milano, and you couldn't keep one of these guys, I think Matt Milano becomes the odd man out, unfortunately. And it doesn't mean that I like him. I think he actually has made more impact in his career so far than Dion Dawkins has. But it's a positional value. It's a team building value. And how can you replace a guy type of value? And I don't know, man. I think it's going to be tough to overpay all this core guys. I know that this is all coming to roost here, and they're going to have to pay some of these guys. It's hard to project how the cap's going to go up here in the future too, what the cap pass, the CBA is going to look like. So there's some of that comes into play with this, but those assets, that 90 million looks real nice now, but you start overpaying on a bunch of these extensions here coming up, and that money it does go away quicker than you think. And especially when we're spending other people's money, it's easier to overpay by a couple million here and there, but Bean is going to have to get tight on some of those overpays.
Yeah, and I mean, just look at these 5 numbers we talked about here. If they were to move forward with each of these, you're talking about a substantial chunk of money. You're talking about 56 million out of that chunk for these guys, and that's so 56 million. I projected Jordan Poyer at 2 years and 25 million, another 12 and a half. When you look at contracts that are out there and using the same logic that they did for these guys, LaMarcus Joyner's at 12.9 million.
Yeah.
Kareem
Where's Eddie Jackson?
Yeah, Kareem Jackson's at 14. Eddie Jackson hasn't kicked in yet, but his is up there at 15 and change. Kevin Byard's at 10.9. Tony Jefferson's at 11.1. Malcolm Jenkins is a 30-year-old safety at 10.8. Harrison Smith, a 30-year-old safety at 10.7. It's going to be Jordan Poyer's going to cost $11 to $12 million at a minimum.
Yeah.
So they 56, that now you're talking about 68 million of that
for
money
4 players.
For and that's counting additional ones with also if we were to keep Shaq and and Jordan Phillips. But heck, that was at the cheaper number for Shaq and Jordan Phillips. If it was actually the numbers closer to what we expect, all of a sudden now you're talking about 72 million out of the 90 million. That means if we were to do that, that would be 0 additional free agents. And that's all funny math. That's not, those extensions wouldn't all hit in 2020. Right. There'd be prorated numbers. We'd have some room to add some players and
you're
still
looking
have
at
the draft class. But when you're planning the long-term money, that annual average is still there.
Yeah, but you're starting to look at bringing in more better minimum guys and lower round, bringing in undrafted free agents, stuff like that to try to patch some of the depth holes. And I think it starts to become a concern of depth versus top end talent. And when you're starting to get into paying all these guys top 5, top 10 player money at their positions, I do think it's time to step back and try to take that fan mask off. And are these guys, it's fine if Dion Dawkins isn't a top 10 left tackle, but you pay him like a top 10 tackle. But you can't do that for every position that's going to be coming up. You can't pay everybody in the top 10 at their position because your team's going to become too top heavy. You're not going to be able to fill out the depth like we saw this year. That was one of the benefits to this team this year was they had the depth, and you saw that come through on special teams. You saw that come through when guys got hurt in spots that they had depth available to them. So it's a fine balancing act as they go forward here of keeping this core together, keeping continuity together, but giving themselves the continued assets and flexibility to continue to bring in depth and maybe not pick from the bottom barrel of free agency, but kind of in that middle ground and the scratch and dent section where Brandon Beane really has kind of thrived in his judicious area that he likes. So it's going to be tough, man. There's going to be some tough decisions to make. I don't think they can overpay everybody. Hopefully the new CBA comes out and the salary cap substantially increases at the right time for the Bills to be able to get a bunch of these guys under the cap. And because I do think if they can keep them all together and keep this core together, they can do something pretty special. I think it's going to be a lot of tough lifting, a lot of money moving around, how bonuses get allocated, things like that. I think Beane and his team can get creative to get some of these guys happy and just get them onto extended contracts. I don't know that I'll have to overpay every single one of them as far as the salary cap hit number. But a lot of money is going to be coming out of Buffalo. And the thing is there are going to be some free agents when they do have the money available. They're going to see that there is money available. And if you play well for Buffalo, there's a chance to come get paid. So there is a piece of that too, that I think they're going to be able to, if they let any of these guys go, like a Matt Milano or Jordan Poyer ends up going through, I think that it's becoming a more attractive place to replace those kind of guys with higher end free agencies versus kind of digging into that bottom of the barrel. So it's kind of a double-edged sword here that they're heading into with, but we see teams all the time manipulate the cap. There's a lot of people out there that believe the salary cap's a myth because you just see these things. You don't know how teams are able to get everybody in under the cap for stretches of 3-4
Yeah.
years.
The Saints have been in cap trouble for a decade.
That's what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Minnesota Vikings, and people thought they were kind of coming up hard against the cap 2 years ago. I think they're going to have to make some tough decisions going forward, but they're having these same conversations. Who do we pay? Who do we go? But they still seem to load up and make another run at it. So I think that there's some flexibility. I think we have smart people in charge of the money. I think there's smart people that are assisting the smart people in charge. So they're kind of, we heard Brandon Beane talk about his team keeping him from making dumb decisions. I think that's a good thing. So I trust in them to apply the right values across the board here. And if they think Dion Dawkins is the number 4, should be paid like the number 4 offensive tackle in football, I'm all for that. They understand that value much more than I do, and I'm going to get behind it. But yeah, man, some of these pills are tough to swallow, and I think we look at the 90 million and 9 picks, but man, that gets eaten up real fast, and starts to get scary here. So this only proves how big of a year and how big of a jump this organization has to take here in 2020, because I think that says a lot. If they take that step forward, you feel a lot better about these extensions to make a run in the next 2 to 3 years, and you're in win now mode. If they regress next year and you're paying out extensions for a team that's on the regression and you're not sure if Josh Allen's the quarterback and maybe you have to start over and McDermott's on the hot seat, that's when the organization gets murky again and we're back to being the same old Bills.
Yeah, there's a couple of really good comments in the comment section here. Ron talking about that, you might have to pick a couple of these guys to draft the replacement for, and that's where one of those draft day surprises could come. Maybe we draft a guy at linebacker who initially is a replacement for Zoe, but really might end up being a replacement for Milano down the line. And Chip talking about that, even Brandon Beane referenced it too, that hopefully you're preparing for needing to cut some ridiculous check for Josh Allen. And that I like the idea that they're going to surround him with talent so we can really find out. But yeah, you need to plan for that kind of thing as well to be able to do it. And Ron and I talk in the premium Slack channel all the time about the value of kind of front loading deals and figuring out how to do that manipulation that you referenced, that we can fit these things in, but you need to be smart about it to be able to figure that out. So as we kind of wrap things up here, again, we just want to talk a little bit about some of the in-house free agents, some names that can be re-signed anytime. You can actually agree to extensions with players at any point here. So we could see those. I don't think we'll see it immediately, but I do think we see a couple of them. I don't know how. I've seen all kinds of rankings of who wants Quentin Spain versus Kevin Johnson versus Jordan Phillips versus Shaq Lawson. I think that we will see some guys with extensions reach between now and then. We'll see the exercising of the exclusive rights free agents and restricted free agents. I do think we'll exercise that for Isaiah McKenzie. We'll see a few of those things happen, and then we'll get into the fun of Aaron and I picking out our wish list of the other free agents that are floating out there. And I think both of us will be a little bit more in the bargain barrel than we have been, but we'll throw some fun names out there as well. Keep an eye out for our coverage next week at the Senior Bowl. We're going to probably have a little bit different, probably some smaller snippets that we'll put out there with maybe some interviews of players. Eric's already has a couple arranged awesome film sessions with some of the guys that are there, some names you guys are going to really like. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then we'll see who we can snag in the hallway and in the hotel, lobby and in the bar, and see if we can get some good sound bites for you guys to be able to show having a good time there. So looking forward to that next week. Any final thoughts for us, Aaron? Where can the people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at AaronQuinn716. I'm going to take it easy next week, man. I'm going on vacation with the family. I'm going to try to stay off Twitter.
Enjoy, man.
And I'm going to try to kind of take my off season here a little bit for a week. And then I can't wait, though. I'm really excited to take a week off Twitter and then kind of get back and consume all this Senior Bowl content here that you guys are going to curate while you're down there. And a little jealous that I'm missing out on the fun with the guys, but nothing beats hanging out with the family and spending that time together too. So I'll still get all the content just like everybody else. I'm looking forward to it because as nice as it's been to have a couple of weeks here, I am ready for something to kind of digest and some content to consume, that the addict in me keeps coming up. So I'm looking forward to all the content. And yeah, you can find me at Aaron Quinn 716. Just having fun, man. Trying to stay busy this off season.
That's awesome, man. Well-deserved time off, some good time away from all the madness. Enjoy time with your beautiful family, so enjoy that. A couple things to watch for, just as I've been kind of prepping for the Senior Bowl. Some of the names that flashed last year ended up mattering. The names that people walked away from the Senior Bowl super excited about were Debo Samuel and Kalen Sanders and Max Crosby and names like that.
Rock you
you know,
sin, my boy.
Rock Ya-Sin, guys who ended up having really good seasons and ended up being some of the best values in the draft. So if you
There's
see
one guy named Terry McLaurin. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but
I
he had a pretty
do.
good week.
There was somebody talking about him last year. I
Yeah,
remember somebody was a big fan. You should have been more on that
he
train.
had a nice week.
So just keep in mind that when you see these names flash at the Senior Bowl and guys who consistently stand out when they get out there and start competing against the other guys who they're going against, when guys stand out in that forum, it matters. So just something to keep an eye out for. If we see some guys really start to generate a buzz, make note of those names and see what we can do to try to get them wrangled over here into a Bills uniform. Thanks again for everything this week. The chat was awesome again. If you want to come out and be a part of this, come and join at cover1.net. Become a premium member. Come and join us in the Slack channel and everything else good we have going on. You can find me on Twitter at Greg Thompson, GregTompsett. Lately, just arguing with people about Brian Daboll for no apparent reason. But I do other things on occasion too. So come and find me there and have a good time. You have been listening to Aaron Quinn and Greg Thompson here. This is the Cover One Buffalo podcast, and we are out.